Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. This is a story that everyone knows about and no one wants to talk about. The rise in Wuhan virus cases, it's like reliving an old nightmare. A spike in infections and deaths, a return to lockdowns. We thought a lot of it would end with the end of 2020 and the introduction of vaccines, but it's not quite going as planned. The surge in India particularly is scary. More than 72,000 cases in a day. Many European countries are shutting down before Easter. In some countries where inoculation was carried out aggressively, the cases have subsided. But the vaccines are not nearly enough to stem the tide the world over. On Gravitas tonight, as we bring you the global picture and map the new hotspots, we'll discuss in detail India's vaccination strategy. How does it help to exclude 75% of the country's population from the vaccination drive? Why is age the bar in accessing vaccines in India? Authorities say there's no shortage of jabs. Then why not open it for all? How is it hampering India's pandemic fight? We'll talk about it also on the show tonight. As Joe Biden tries to boost the economy with a $2 trillion infrastructure plan, the migrant crisis on the US border is worsening by the day. Greta Thunberg is back in the news, this time as a statue. It's worth more than $33,000. The question is, why? In the South China Sea, Chinese maritime militia is at work, an armada of 200 ships provoking the Philippines. We'll tell you how the standoff is shaping up. And it's April Fool's Day. Why is it celebrated? When did it begin? We may have a story on that for you, but we begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
More than 100 protesters with red makeup to simulate tears of blood took out a march and sang together in Yangon against the military while honoring hundreds killed so far by security forces. This as protesters burned copies of the constitution in Dawei. Britain announces sanctions against the Myanmar Economic Corporation for its role in serious human rights violations. The development comes a week after Washington's crackdown. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab condemns the wanton killing of innocents, including children. 9 veteran Hong Kong activists have been convicted on unlawful assembly charges for their role in organizing the massive democracy protests in 2019. 2 among the 9 accused had already pleaded guilty. A Pakistan cabinet meeting chaired by Prime Minister Imran Khan has rejected a government panel's decision made on Wednesday to allow imports of sugar and cotton from India. If implemented, the ECC's decision would have led to the resumption of trade between India and Pakistan after almost 2 years. Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has raised security and connectivity in the region at the 17th virtual BIMSTEC summit of foreign ministers. Myanmar found no mention, despite the presence of junta-appointed Foreign Minister Munawon Lin. Scuffles broke out in Rio de Janeiro as supporters of President Jair Bolsonaro clashed with opponents. Protesters are being held on the anniversary of the country's 1964 military coup to oppose the sacking of the 3 military chiefs and Bolsonaro's handling of the pandemic. 15 million doses of J&J COVID vaccines have been ruined as workers at a plant in Baltimore in the US manufacturing 2 coronavirus vaccines accidentally conflated the ingredients several weeks ago, contaminating the entire batch of doses. Libyan authorities have released 120 captured pro-Haftar fighters in a reconciliatory gesture and a move towards national unity. The men had been held since April 2019, when Haftar launched an assault to seize control of the capital, Tripoli. Four-time champions Germany have suffered a chastening defeat to North Macedonia in the qualifiers for the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Goran Pandev gave the world's 65th ranked team a shock lead on the stroke of half-time. But although Germany leveled through a penalty from Ilkay Gundogan, Elif Elmas' 85th minute strike sealed the biggest win in North Macedonia's football history. This is Germany's first World Cup qualifying defeat since 2003. Naomi Osaka's quest to regain the world #1 ranking from Ashley Barty has been put on hold after a meltdown in the quarterfinals of the Miami Open. The Japanese star was riding a 23-match winning streak stretching back to February last year, but she was completely out of sorts against Greece's Maria Sakkari. The world #25 needed just 21 minutes to pocket the first set and then rallied from a 3-low down in the second to complete a 6-low, 6-3 victory.
This is a story we did not want to tell, a story we hoped won't develop, but it has. The pandemic is surging again, the cases are on the rise, lockdowns are being reimposed. In many parts of the world, there's a third wave. The virus is mutating and spreading faster, even with vaccines. I've said this before and I'll say this again. A vaccine is at best a shield. It is not an invisibility cloak. The pandemic is not over. If anything, it is getting worse. Look at the numbers. They are from last week. New cases worldwide have been rising for 5 straight weeks now. Last week, more than 3.8 million new cases were recorded globally. That's a 14% rise. The mortality rate is also up by 5%. More than 64,000 people died last week. These are the countries that have reported the biggest jump in transmissions: India, the United States, Brazil, Turkey, Poland, Italy, Ukraine, the Philippines, Germany and Iran. The cases are growing and the spike is not regional. Almost all continents that struggled with a major outbreak before are now reporting new waves of cases. These are the regions that have reported the most noticeable jump in cases. Southeast Asia, new cases are up by a whopping 49%. The Western Pacific, why? Why is there a surge now and what is driving these new cases? The variants of the Wuhan virus spread more easily and they're deadlier than the original version. Take the case of France. It has been forced to lock down for the 3rd time now. Do you know how many people have died in France so far? Close to 100,000. A report says intensive care units in the hardest hit regions are now at breaking point. Yesterday, President Emmanuel Macron blamed the British variant of the virus for the latest outbreak. He said this variant is creating a pandemic inside a pandemic. That's because the variant is more contagious and deadly. Macron said France will lose control if it doesn't do something now.
We decided on the 18th of March to take further measures alongside the curfew in almost 20 regions. 2 weeks after taking those measures, the numbers are clear. Yes, this strategy had its first effects. But clearly, these efforts are very limited as the epidemic surges. In some ways, we are facing this acceleration due to the new UK variant. We will lose control if we do not move now. In upcoming months, we need to set a new framework.
The lockdown in France will last another 4 weeks. And it's hardly the exception. The whole of Europe is struggling. Germany has extended restrictions till the 18th of April. But the lockdown has been cancelled for Easter. In Italy, there's no such relief. It will remain totally locked down during Easter as well. Reports say shops, restaurants and schools have again been closed in more than half of Italy. Similarly, the Czech Republic, Spain, Belgium, Portugal, the Netherlands and Ireland are all imposing some form of a lockdown or pandemic restriction. The United States is also battling a surge. Even after accelerating its vaccination program, the deadly new infections have risen by 12% in the last 1 week. The White House held a virtual health briefing this week. The director of America's Center for Disease Control and Prevention addressed the press and admitted that she was scared of where things were heading.
To reflect on the recurring feeling I have of impending doom. We have so much to look forward to, so much promise and potential of where we are, and so much reason for hope. But right now, I'm scared.
The situation in India is worrying too. Today, the country reported more than 72,000 cases. That's the highest number of new infections since the 11th of October last year. And just for context, fresh cases in India had dropped below 10,000 2 months back. Less than 10,000 in January. But now India is reporting more than 70,000 new cases in a day. That's a 7-fold jump. In the last 1 year, more than 12 million Indians have been infected with the Wuhan virus. And the number is only set to increase. There are restrictions in some states and night curfews have been imposed. Starting today, India has also widened its vaccination program. Now, anyone above the age of 45 can get the shot, but it may not be enough to meet the challenge. Remember, while the virus continues to mutate, our best bet against it remains the same: social distancing, masks, and vaccines. There is an urgent need to step up inoculations now, and that's the only way to break the chain of infection. In fact, the trends are clear. There is a worldwide surge, the virus is spreading faster, and the differentiator will be vaccines. Countries which vaccinate their population in larger numbers will see a drop in cases. Countries which lag behind will see a surge. Our next report shows you how vaccines have made all the difference in Israel and the United Kingdom.
Israel enjoyed some normalcy on Passover this year. This open-air shopping center was alive again. People are filling up restaurants. Hotels, museums and theatres are back in business. For 79-year-old Leslie Alexander Berger, the reopening couldn't have come at a better time.
And now I can celebrate in a restaurant with my children and my grandchildren, and we've gone back to a normal life, pretty well almost normally.
The situation was very different last year. Businesses had to shut their doors. There were checkpoints on the roads and people were confined to their homes, just like the rest of the world. But Israel has accomplished a major turnaround thanks to vaccines. Reports say Israel's active cases are now down to their lowest level since June 2020, with serious infections dipping below 400. That's a 3-month low. Israel has vaccinated more than half of its population, and the jabs are working. Symptomatic infections dropped by 94% in 600,000 people who got 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. The same group is also 92% less likely to develop severe illness from the virus. The United Kingdom too seems to have tamed the virus with vaccines. Back in January, the UK was struggling. A surge driven by a new strain of the virus had forced the country to impose a 3rd national lockdown. By the 5th of January, the country had recorded more than 50,000 cases for 7 straight days. The UK approved 2 vaccines: the Pfizer shot that is being supplied from Belgium and the Oxford vaccine that is made in Britain. Now more than 50% people out of a population of more than 66 million have got at least 1 shot, making the British vaccine rollout the fastest in Europe. The benefits are evident. New infections are substantially down. On Tuesday, the UK had reported a little more than 4,000 cases. The 7-day total stood at close to 36,000, down by almost 8%. On Sunday, the City of London recorded 0 daily deaths in a single day for the first time in more than 6 months. Earlier this week, the United Kingdom began easing the lockdown. People are now allowed to gather in groups of 6 in public spaces. Even the Queen of England was out and about again after having got the jab in January. There is enough real-world evidence now that proves the effectiveness of vaccines. The shots not only protect against symptoms, but also reduce the spread of the virus. The only problem is there is not enough to go around. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Let's talk about India now. The country has recorded 72,330 new cases of the Wuhan virus in just the last 24 hours. 72,330 cases in a day. The numbers are pointing at a second wave. How does India plan to tide over it? You may say India has vaccines, and you're right, India does have vaccines. But the question is, does India have a foolproof vaccine strategy? India is the world's largest vaccine maker. It is currently driving the world's largest vaccination campaign. 2 vaccines have received regulatory approval within the country. 1, Oxford AstraZeneca and Serum Institute of India's Covishield. And 2, Bharat Biotech's Covaxin. These are the 2 vaccines being administered in India, Covaxin and Covishield. Now, India has exported almost 64.4 million doses of vaccines. These were given as gifts or donations or sold to some countries or given as part of India's COVAX commitment. That's the Global Vaccine Alliance, COVAX. So 64.6 million doses for the rest of the world. How many for Indians? 65.12 million. 65.12 million doses have been used at home till date. India's vaccination program began on the 16th of January. Healthcare and sanitation workers were the first to be inoculated. The second phase included senior citizens, and today the third phase began with all citizens who are above 45 years of age or older getting the jab. Now, as we speak, over 65.12 million people have been inoculated in India. 9.33 million people have received both the doses. 55.7 million have received a single shot. India's plan is to inoculate 250 million people by July. The numbers look impressive, but are they good enough? Consider this. India is a young country. India's median age is 26.8 years, which means that half of India's population is below 26.8 years of age. But these people do not qualify for inoculation in India. In other words, more than half of the world's second most populous country does not meet the criteria for receiving life-saving drugs. What is the logic? Initially, it was believed that young people are less vulnerable to the Wuhan virus, but that has been proven to be untrue, especially with the mutations. Young people are being infected and young people are losing their lives. The virus does not discriminate based on demography, but India's vaccine strategy clearly does. It has also discounted young people with comorbidities, youngsters who are fighting cancer, for instance, or other life-threatening illnesses, and young people in high-risk categories with problems like high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity. They are not getting the vaccine either. A survey conducted by an online platform called Local Circles found that 75% of Indian citizens are in favor of the government opening the vaccination program for all citizens above the age of 18. Where's the perk of being the world's pharmacy if India is forced to restrict its own vaccination program? Where is the advantage of being the world's vaccine manufacturing hub if India cannot inoculate its own? Currently, only 25.35% of India's population is eligible for vaccination. The age group 45 or above makes up for just 345 million people. We have a total population of 1.36 billion. 345 million can get the jab. That's just 1/4. How does India plan to fight the virus resurgence with nearly 75% of its population still at risk, with school children still at risk, with a population that travels, goes to work and socializes the most still not vaccinated? This, we say, is not the best strategy to achieve herd immunity. India must expand its vaccination program and do so immediately. Many countries already have. The United States, for example, has opened vaccination for all adults with comorbidities and those above 18 working in public-facing jobs. The United Kingdom is inoculating those above 16 who are in high-risk groups. In the United Arab Emirates, everyone above the age of 16 is eligible for vaccination. China too is vaccinating people above 18 years of age. Same with Canada and Israel. What is stopping India? India must realize that its young workforce is its back. It's not wise to cripple this age group by denying it life. Punish this group for not being old enough to receive the jabs. It's time for India to rethink its vaccine strategy. Now, if there's one topic where most politicians find common ground, it is the promise of infrastructure. The world over, pledges to spend big on housing, transport, energy, water, waste and telecommunication systems are seen as vote magnets in every democracy. Well, how is this news? Because the oldest democracy in the world has come up with yet another sweeping infrastructure plan. US President Joe Biden has promised to spend more than $2 trillion to re-engineer his country's infrastructure. The plan is admirably ambitious, but $2 trillion, that's a lot of money. It's worth more than Joe Biden's COVID relief bill. Where will all this money come from? Where will it go? And what do Americans have to say about it? Next report gets you the best and the worst of Biden's infrastructure plan.
What I'm proposing is a one-time capital investment of roughly $2 trillion in America's future, spread largely over 8 years.
$2 trillion. That's more money than the combined wealth of Bill Gates, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. What exactly is all this money meant for? To modernize the already modern United States of America. Or, as Joe Biden puts it, to win the future.
We have to move now, because I'm convinced that if we act now, in 50 years, people are going to look back and say, this was the moment that America won the future.
This plan is being touted as a once-in-a-generation investment. It is part of the first phase of Biden's Build Back Better program. And it details massive investments spread over a period of 8 years. $650 billion have been allocated to modernize roads, railways, and transport. Out of this, $20 billion alone will be spent on road safety programs. Another $20 billion to reconnect neighborhoods divided by highways. $25 billion to modernize airports. $17 billion for waterways and ports. And $174 billion to boost the electric vehicle market.
It's about infrastructure. The American Jobs Plan will modernize 20,000 miles of highways, roads, and main streets that are in difficult shape right now.
$650 billion will be spent on home infrastructure. The key programs include spending $100 billion to upgrade and build new schools, replacing 100% of water-bearing lead pipes and service lines, constructing 2 million housing units and veterans hospitals, and providing broadband access to 35% of rural Americans.
We'll make sure every single American has access to high-quality, affordable, high-speed internet.
$400 billion have been set aside for the care economy to fund home or community-based care for hundreds of thousands of senior citizens and create well-paying jobs for people with disabilities.
Chance to protect our children, help them learn and thrive. We can't delay. We can't delay another minute. It's long past due.
And lastly, $580 billion will be spent on manufacturing, training and research. This figure includes two primary programs, a $50 billion investment in semiconductor manufacturing and a $180 billion investment on the development of clean energy. But how exactly is America going to foot the bill? This plan will make multiple changes to U.S. tax rules and put the cost entirely on corporations. This includes raising U.S. corporate tax rate to 28% from 21%, raising tax rate on income made from corporates overseas to 21% from 13%, eliminating all fossil fuel industry subsidies, establishing a minimum tax on income companies use to report profits, and raising taxes on wealthy Americans. But Joe Biden insists he has nothing against the wealthy.
No one making under $400,000 will see their federal taxes go up, period. This is not about penalizing anyone. I have nothing against millionaires and billionaires. I believe American capitalism. I want everyone to do well.
The American media is rooting for this plan. They're calling it big, bold, and progressive. But not everyone is excited about raising taxes on corporations. The response from Wall Street has been largely negative. And to add to that, a 50-50 power balance in the US Senate will make it extremely tough for anything of this scale to pass through. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Getting the US Congress to pass the infrastructure plan is not the only challenge before Joe Biden. American borders are staring at an immigration crisis. Thousands of migrants are going to America. The detention centers are overwhelmed. Now smugglers, listen to this, smugglers are dropping children over the border wall. You have to see it to believe it.
This is surveillance footage from cameras near Santa Teresa in New Mexico. A smuggler is sitting on the top of the US-Mexico border wall. He drops two Ecuadorian children on the American side and escapes. The US Border Patrol has called the incident appalling. But this could be just the beginning of a bigger crisis. Earlier this week, hundreds of Hondurans set out for America. This is the second large caravan to leave Honduras this year. They're all willing to risk their lives for the promise of a better life in America. The police in Honduras asked this caravan to return. But trouble is brewing at the US-Mexico border.
Pues si a mí me han dicho que están trancadas las pasadas, pero como el hondureño es bien necio. Y vamos a ver, a aventurar, porque no queda de otra. Hay que ir a ver, a luchar, porque si no, nunca vamos a salir adelante. Toda la vida vamos a vivir en esta pobreza.
¿No temen lo que puede enfrentar en la frontera?
¿Cómo no? Sí temen, ¿no? Porque han dicho que los están esperando hasta con bombas lagrimosas, dicen. Pero ¿y qué se va a hacer? Hay que sufrir uno para gozar después.
Earlier this week, a group of 100 asylum seekers were trying to enter America through Texas. They encountered the US Customs and Border Protection agents on their way. The border town of Roma in Texas is at the center of the immigrant wave. Every night, locals see dozens of migrants arriving on the shore in boats after they illegally cross the Rio Grande River that forms a part of the US-Mexico border. In February, US authorities arrested and stopped more than 100,000 migrants on the US-Mexico border. That's the highest surge since 2019. Pictures of crowded holding facilities tell the tale. This video is from Donna, Texas, where children have been crammed inside an overcrowded tent. While this facility only has a capacity of 250, more than 4,000 migrants are living inside these pods. Children sleep on mats with trauma blankets. 2 weeks ago, the Biden administration stepped up border expulsions. But with the humanitarian crisis still prevailing in Central America, it looks like the United States will continue to struggle in stemming the flow of migrants. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
She's one of the most polarizing figures of the 21st century, a climate crusader at 15, a three-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee and scolder-in-chief of world leaders. We are talking about Greta Thunberg. She's in the news once again, or at least her likeness is. A statue of Greta has been unveiled at the University of Winchester in Britain, a life-size sculpture carved out of bronze. The cost? £24,000. That's more than 24 lakh in Indian money, more than 33,000 US dollars. We have two questions. Why, and more importantly, why now? The university is quite impressed with itself. This is apparently the first life-size sculpture of Greta Thunberg. But the students are confused. Why Greta, they say? She has no links to the college. Until a couple of months back, she was not even eligible to enroll there. Here's how the Vice-Chancellor responded to the criticism. And I'm quoting, "Greta is a young woman who, in spite of difficulties in her life, has become a world-leading environmental activist. As the University of Justice, we are proud to honor this incident in this way." So the university wanted to consider statue is the best way to do it. Not scholarships, not a library, not gardens or trees, but a £24,000 statue. The Students' Union is livid. They have their own theory about the statue. You see, the Vice-Chancellor retired in March. This was her legacy project. She probably did not anticipate the backlash. £24,000 is a lot of money, especially at a time like this. Students need support for remote learning. Foreign students are barely making ends meet. Now is the time to invest more in education. The university says no money was diverted from students or staff funding, but that just doesn't cut it. With £24,000, the university could have bought more than 100 laptops, more than 400 tablets, and sponsored 2,400 hot-cooked meals. In that context, the statue is nothing but wasteful expenditure.
Concern is the financial impact. You know, £23,760 is a large sum of money, especially in the year that we're in, and the timing of it as well. You know, as I say, we're in a COVID year. Lots of students haven't really had access to campus. Lots of them are trying to study online. They're really in need of dire support. We just feel like it presents the priorities of the university, and they're not where they should be.
The priorities of the university are not where they should be. It's difficult to argue with that. The Students' Union has passed a motion declaring the statue a vanity project. Look at some of the reactions on social media. One student at the university writes, My university just spent $26,000 on a statue of Greta, yet they wouldn't buy us a carton of milk when our flat got put into isolation." Another student writes, "Staff have been made redundant. Rent relief has been denied to students here and abroad. Students are having to eat into their savings to cover rent. The well-being services are subpar." The university was seduced by the larger-than-life image of Greta, by the political correctness her name resonates, and in the process it forgot about the students. But it's not just about the money. What about the politics of the statue? 2020 saw a lively debate on these lifeless tributes. Many statues were pulled down by anti-racism protesters. People realized that their heroes were not perfect. What about Greta Thunberg? Does her career warrant a statue? Greta shot to fame by bunking school. She called it a climate strike. And since then, she has urged students around the world to do the same. But if everyone bunks classes, who solves the issue of climate change? Who develops hybrid technology for green cars? We have a better suggestion. Let students learn. Let their ingenuity be the solution to climate change. Greta's belief that striking classes equals legitimate protest cuts at the root of education, especially in a world where thousands of children are denied this right, the right to education. Greta Thunberg believes that all humans are climate deniers, that there is no debate on the issue. The reality is quite the opposite. Climate change is the undeniable reality of our times. It is the most hotly debated issue right now. Multiple climate summits are lined up this year. We know what some of you are thinking, though. Greta Thunberg never asked for the statue. Yes, she did not. But 2 days on, she's yet to react. She who jumps into political issues in faraway countries is silent on the debate over her own statue. The world is already divided. Do we really need an equally divisive figure for what should be a unifying cause? The university has named the statue Make a Difference. Statues are lifeless, ignored by most people. They can't make a difference. but that £24,000 would most certainly have. Now to Mozambique, a country that is rarely spoken about. It is now dominating global headlines. It has got the world talking. It has also got the world scared. Do you know why? Because it is staring at the risk of becoming the next Syria. Terrorists from the Islamic State group are trying to create a new caliphate in Mozambique. There is growing concern among neighboring countries. Southern African Development Community has held emergency talks in Zimbabwe. The bloc is reportedly preparing for a military intervention. The African Union has called for urgent regional and international action. All eyes are currently on the town of Palma. Here's a report.
Mozambique's military has moved into Palma, Mozambique's strategic gas hub. On the 24th of March, the town was attacked by Al-Shabaab terrorists. The group is affiliated to the Islamic State. They came into Palma from 3 directions with the aim to gain control over the town. In the days that followed, banks were raided. Expats and locals were killed. Decapitated bodies were thrown on the streets. Some locals escaped the assault by boat. Many took refuge in dense forests and mangrove swamps. Mariamo Tagir was one of them.
I'm so tired. It was 7 days on the bushes. I'm so tired. We crossed paths several times with evildoers. It's very painful. I was crying every day. I don't know where my son is. It's very painful.
Several others, along with Mariamo, have now arrived at the port of Pemba.
That was a difficult moment. The truth is that it was a massacre. None of us would like to go back there again.
Palma is now staring at the risk of becoming the new ISIS caliphate, the next Mosul. Al-Shabaab has already expanded across much of Mozambique's Cabo Delgado, a province almost the size of Australia. Mozambique's government has failed to check the spread of terror, despite help from private military contractors.
Our humanitarian colleagues there tell us that the escalation of violence in Cabo Delgado province continues to drive massive displacement following the recent attacks by non-state armed groups and ongoing clashes reported in Palma since March 24th. The security situation remains volatile and is of concern to all of us.
The forces are gaining territory. Yes, we are occupying practically. We are extending our control all across.
Mozambique's forces deny the possibility of Palma slipping into Al-Shabaab's control. If it does, though, the Islamic State group will get control over a $60 billion gas project, which will give them an enormous economic boost. Experts say getting control of Palma will help the terror group funnel money back to Iraq and Syria. We must remember it took 5 years and 83 countries to defeat the Islamic State in Syria. You can imagine what will happen if history repeats itself in Mozambique. For now, most communication to Palma remains cut. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
The late Middle Ages were marked by terror on the height of Viking ships. They would come, displace the inhabitants, and settle on land. The Vikings had no concept of sovereignty. They believed in power and power only. Does it sound familiar? China is the modern-day terror on the high seas. A different time, a different sea, but the same motive, power. A Chinese armada has descended on Spratly Islands in the South China Sea. It is a contested island, rich in oil and gas. The Armada was first spotted on the 7th of March. They were sailing in the Philippine Sea. It was an open challenge to Manila. The government ordered the Chinese ships to withdraw. It was wishful thinking at best. Far from pulling back, the Chinese vessels fanned out. They're now spread across the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, 200 Chinese ships languidly anchored in foreign waters. The Philippines has called it an incursion, but it is fast resembling a well-planned invasion. Because not only have the ships crossed over, they're planning to stay. The Philippine military have found illegal man-made structures on the island, specifically near the Union Banks. This is where the massive Chinese build-up has been observed. So what does China have to say for itself? It's time to play the broken tape recorder again. We've seen this template repeatedly over the years. China first intrudes into foreign waters, and when there is international protest, it responds with the same defense. The island belongs to the People's Republic.
With the joint efforts of countries in the region, the situation in the South China Sea is generally stable. Whitsun Reef is part of China's Spratly Islands and has always been an important wind shelter for Chinese fishing boats. It is perfectly normal for Chinese fishing boats to take shelter in the waters around the reef.
You heard what she said. Chinese fishing boats are seeking shelter from bad weather. That's the best that Beijing could come up with. The maritime gods must be really angry with China because they've cursed it with a month-long spell of bad weather, a month long. And who exactly are these fishermen with seemingly endless funds? They've been anchored for close to a month and are not showing any interest in moving. The end game is clear. China wants to settle the reef, build an artificial island there, or military bases perhaps, basically take control. There is precedent for this. In 2012, China moved in to Scarborough Shoal. Administered by the Philippines, Chinese warships sailed into the region as a leading geopolitical battleground. The US and its allies are a lot engaged in the region now, and that's what the Chinese build-up. The White House has promised Australia and Japan, but China does not care about its image. It wants power. It wants territory. So are things heading towards a standoff? There are reports that NATO is considering deployments to the region. This is a chance for Joe Biden to come good on his Indo-Pacific rhetoric. For China, this marks a sharp escalation. A dozen boats is a message. An armada of 200-plus ships is a signal of war. So far, Beijing has been happy doing checkbook diplomacy, suffocating nations under the burden of debt. But what happens when that strategy fails? Beijing did try to woo Manila with money. But in 2020, President Duterte rubbished Chinese claims over the South China Sea. The wallet had failed. It was time for the gun. Let me end by circling back to the Vikings. History remembers them as barbarians, like most invaders are. But in the Middle Ages, those Norsemen had the excuse of not knowing better. Today, in the civilized and globalized world, what is China's excuse? Other than its craze and lust for power. In oil revenue, $270 billion, thanks to the pandemic. For Saudi Arabia, the biggest oil exporter has left a big hole in its budget. The kingdom expected its budget deficit to soar to around $79 billion last year. The timing couldn't have been better for Saudi Arabia to pivot to a future without oil. Riyadh is now planning a major economic overhaul with investments worth $3.2 trillion. Our next report tells you more.
The Gulf's oil empire is on a slippery slope. Oil revenues in West Asia and North Africa have dropped by almost half in the last decade. From $1 trillion in 2012 to $575 billion in 2019. The pandemic has only accelerated the end of the oil boom. Saudi Arabia wants to turn this crisis into an opportunity. Riyadh is planning a pivot away from oil through a major cash injection.
As we already announced, earlier this year, the Public Investment Fund will pump in 3 trillion riyals in new investments until 2030, in addition to 4 trillion riyals that will be injected under the National Investment Strategy, and its details will be announced soon.
Saudi Arabia plans to pump in $3.2 trillion into its economy by 2030 in an effort to jumpstart its economy after the pandemic. A large part of the cash infusion will be funded by 24 of the kingdom's biggest companies, from energy giant Aramco to petrochemical firm SABIC. The rest of the cash will come from the Public Investment Fund, Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, and a new national investment strategy that Riyadh hopes will create thousands of new jobs, strengthen private sector, and boost economic growth. These investments are much needed. The pandemic came as a shock to Saudi Arabia's economy, forcing Riyadh to triple the value-added tax, or VAT, and suspend a monthly allowance to civil servants. These measures were necessary to rein in a growing deficit. Since 2014, Saudi Arabia has posted a budget deficit every year, even after tightening its belt. In December last year, Riyadh projected a budget deficit of $79 billion. The bigger challenge is unemployment. It touched a record high of 15.4% last year. Now it has improved to 13%. A little more than 7% of Saudi men are jobless, while almost 25% of Saudi women are without a job. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is now trying to reshape his country's economy. He has come up with a $7 trillion plan for the next decade. This includes major government spending commitments for revival. With the pandemic accelerating the pivot away from oil, Riyadh doesn't have easy choices. Bureau Report, WION. World is one.
We haven't forgotten what today's date is. It's the 1st of April, aka April Fool's Day. Have you fallen for a practical joke yet? Well, I can assure you that none of the reports you saw on this show tonight were fake. The crisis is real, as is the resurging pandemic. But there's no harm in having some fun when everything around us looks so negative. I personally see nothing wrong in April Fool's